Welcome back to the Iron and Intention podcast, where discipline matters, standards matter, and what you build is supposed to hold up when the pressure hits. Today's podcast is very, very different than what we have done in the past. Today's podcast is not with a fellow first responder. It's not with a veteran. It's not with an emergency manager. Today, we're going to be talking to someone who's built something that can be applied across all of those things. Our conversation today starts in small town Missouri, but it doesn't just stay there. Our guest is Coach Bryant Wright, Hall of Fame coach and co-author of the book Built Right: What It Takes to Build Something That Lasts. Over the decades, Coach Wright built one of the most consistent and disciplined, durable high school athletic programs in the country. 13 state championships, 8 of them in a row. But more importantly, he built standards that didn't bend. He built a culture that didn't depend on one person and a system that held together when things got hard. You see, Built Right isn't a book about sports. It's not a book about cross country. It's a book about leadership. And leaders within the public sector can learn lots of valuable lessons from this book. You see, it's a blueprint around a simple truth. The pressure's going to come, growth will come, and turnover will happen. The question is your organization ready to stand up? Was it built right before the test arrived? If that sounds familiar to any leaders in public safety, emergency management, or on the frontline medicine, it should, because leaders in public safety, emergency managers, and frontline medical professions don't get to choose when that pressure shows up. They don't get warm-up reps, and they don't get excuses when systems fail. What Coach Wright learned from building a championship team in a small Missouri town about accountability, ownership, peer leadership, and non-negotiable standards maps directly to the environments where lives depend on people doing the right thing consistently, especially when no one's watching. This episode is about what lasts, not heroics, not short-term wins, but leadership built to endure. Coach Wright, welcome to the Iron and Intention podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. I hope to do this justice today. These are some people that you're talking to that I have a high amount of respect for.
Thanks, Bryant. Just in transparency, Coach Wright is my cousin. We grew up together in the St. Louis, Missouri area. He has always been somebody that I looked up to. He's been that cousin that was a couple years older than me, and I've been so proud to watch his career and watch what he's done with his teams, and it's fantastic. And so everybody listen close, because these messages are really going to resonate with how you can build your team to be ready for when it hits. So, Bryant, the pressure will come: growth, change, turnover. The real question is not if our organization is going to be tested, it's whether it was built right before it was tested. So when first responders hear the phrase, the pressure will come, they're going to nod immediately because they know that pressure is a daily reality for them. So for an organization, what does being built right before the test arrive actually look like?
Well, I think there's a few things we could look at. I think in particular, when you get down to the level of the individuals and they're doing the thing that they do best, and that's help to protect people and to help people in situations that can be very difficult. And that's the muscle memory. You got to be able to train so that you know what to do when it comes, so that your brain doesn't freeze. You know right away what you need to do. You also, I think, need to have the fitness level to be able to do the things that come your way. And I also think that you need to make sure that those people that are around you are ones that you can depend on, because at some point they will be. I think standards that you set, the drills that you do, and the exercises you do to make yourself the best you can be is very important. Those standards are more important than moods, how you feel. If you want to do them, if you don't want to do them, you still do them, because those standards are needed there. And as I alluded to, trust in those that work around you, because in many situations, the person that is with you is the person that will save your life or prevent your life from being taken. And so I think those are three things that you need to consider. I also think that it's important. This is something that I've heard somewhere before, and it is that you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your training. So when those situations get in, you don't rise to those levels. I think when I practice with the athletes, I want their work has to be harder than a race. I want them to be able to come to me and say, Coach, I would rather race any day than be in one of your practices. Because I think when that occasion comes, you're going to settle back down to your training. And that's the most important thing that you can do.
Man, that is spot on. It's something that's stressed in this occupation, but I think sometimes maybe we do drop our standards for convenience sake, for scheduling. So all those are great points. You know, you and I are both a couple of I mean, we're relatively young in the grand scheme of things, but we're a couple of older guys that grew up maybe under a little bit different conditions than today's athletes, today's employees. We always were under the belief that exposure to stress makes us tougher. How does your work challenge the idea that pressure alone builds strength?
Yeah, that's a great question because, that was pounded in our head about being tough and doing things that potentially could, in effect, hurt you. And sometimes it didn't. And I'd like to think that we probably just got away with those a few times. So I think true toughness is built on a strategic combination of like controlled challenge, then this intentional recovery. And then by doing that, you don't simply just survive. And when I was working with the athletes, I found that to be very, very important. That you have a stress and then you have a relaxation, and that's where the rest comes in, and that's where the growth builds. And so you have to basically have those. You If you have stress all the time, if you're always stressed, what you're going to basically do is you're going to cause people to burn out. People will never have that release. They'll never be able to enjoy what they're doing because they're always under the stress. And at some point you got to release that stress from them, and you got to give them what you might consider an active recovery, and that's the building stage. And the pressure should be used to shape and train people, but you can't crush them, because when you crush them they can't figure out how to navigate through challenges and skills, and they're doing really is enduring pain. And so the whole idea is you want them to get to that higher level of not just being stressed and pain, but learn from what's going on and rebuild from that. And if they do have some challenges that they don't, let's say they feel like they failed, learn from their failure and move on. And that's going to make them, that's a long term effect of training people.
So, on that note, leaders don't always get to start with a brand new team. Obviously, when you became a coach, you weren't starting with a whole new team. You inherited some team members that were there probably prior to you actually taking over as coach. And many times, organizations in public safety and emergency management and frontline medical professions, they inherit a team. And those teams have long histories and entrenched cultures. How do they honestly assess whether what they're standing on is built right or just held together?
Well, you got to look at that system. And so, if it's held together, the culture will often, it relies on someone being heroic, a heroine, someone that's a hero, that these efforts by these individuals, they might potentially be what everyone talks about, but what it does in many cases is it masks like flaws in the system. If somebody has to be a hero, think about it like this: if somebody has to be a hero, a problem has to happen. If you can prevent the problem from happening in the first place, no one needs to be a hero. So if you look at those two situations, you can determine what the department's all about. So what happens if that one individual's gone? Does the process completely break down? If it does, well, maybe it's just relying on this one individual. Does this culture, can they adapt? Have they adapted? Does their history show that they've adapted in many cases? Or are they kind of hiding behind, you know, different guys? Well, they weren't here to do it, or this is the way we always have done it. Do they hide behind those kind of situations? Because you can ask all those kind of questions. Look at the decisions. Were the decisions always made at the top with no input? I know when I was coaching, there are some things that are non-negotiable. You have to make the decisions, but there's other things that you can ask for input. And let me tell you, when you get input, people will then consider it more of their own culture. For example, when when the juniors became seniors, one of the big things I let them do is I let them design our cross country shirts. I let them design the front. I let them design the quote. Now, that was their own. They did that. The seniors did that. And that wouldn't have, for me, I got to preview it. So I knew there wasn't anything on there that shouldn't be on there. And then I got to send out the orders. But that was something I allowed them to do that gave them a little bit more involvement and just small things like that. Just, if you ask the individuals, and I know a lot of times, even when I worked in a factory, for a small time or summer job. There were these guys that were been working there for years, and they had some really good solutions to make things easier, but no one wanted to listen to them. And so maybe if you ask your people that are working under you, hey, what would be a better way to do this? Let's see if we can solve this. You might come up with something pretty awesome. Because I learned as a leader, and a lot of leaders don't admit it, but there's some people that you lead that are smarter than you, and they might be able to help you out in some situations if you were just willing to allow them to help you do that. Also, if you look, can these employees, can they disagree with you or with people in the past and not, there's one way to disagree and everybody goes on their way, and there's another way, okay, if you disagree you're out. And so it's some things obviously are non-negotiable, but there are other things that you can disagree and still be okay with each other. One other way I think you could look at it is, what's the turnover rate? I mean, if there's a lot of turnover rate, then you're probably seeing that things are just held together because no one wants to go to a place where they're not sure if, they're going to get injured because some guy's not going to be doing his job. And I think sometimes it's good just to talk to individuals one on one and just see where the reality is, because I knew as a coach, I was with them and I saw them when I was with them. But when I was not with them, I knew that things were going to be a little different. And so if you can talk to the individuals, and you're not telling them to tell on each other, but hey, how's everything going? If you got guys that are your leaders, how's everything going? And they might say, well, so and so's this, so and so's this. Well, you got to have your confidence. You still got to confide in them, but you can head off some problems and maybe some misunderstandings that have taken place that in that that could cause some major problems down the long run.
Sure. So your book talks about leaders failing or organizations failing, and it talks about how they don't fail because leaders lack effort or talent or even good intentions, but it talks about some ways that leaders can fail. This our whole leadership culture, we'll kind of circle back a little bit here. It was all on effort and sacrifice, and those things were almost sacred. Why can that leadership mentality of making sacrifice and that overly devoted culture to the job, why can that actually mask or how can it actually mask a deeper leadership or organizational weakness that would contribute to a failure?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one thing that does that is that when you normalize the deficiency of your resources. So say, hey guys, we just don't have the money, or we don't have the people to do this. So we have to go ahead and we have to make sacrifices, and you have to use subpar equipment. Well, that's a problem. And I know with cross country not being one of the major sports for a while, we are now, especially at Festus. Festus is known for cross country. That was one of the things, is like, well, where even teachers, for example, well, we just need to work harder without the things that we need. Well, that's a shame. First of all, I know at one time people would use that as a badge of pride. Look at what I did with the little bit I had. But that's a shame that that has to happen, and that comes from normalizing the resource deficiencies, and that's a shame. I often looked at that and I was like, well, that's a shame that we have to say those kind of things. I mean, it's great that we can overcome these things, but we should not have to do that. So that's a major problem. I think hiding toxic leadership is another problem. A guy that has poor planning or lacks vision, this kind of guy, an incompetent guy, he can cause problems to fail, but maybe he has some pretty good guys that work for him and they compensate for that. So that's another reason, that, well, we're going to do our job because we believe in what we're doing, even if our leader is not good or he's toxic. And people rise. I saw cross country teams where almost everybody in the team did not like the coach. And that's the thing they had in common. And that's the thing that made them good, because they said, we're going to be good in spite of this guy. And I can see that happening as well. Also, I think burnout in some cases is a badge of honor for people where, they talk about exhaustion, and exhaustion eventually masks the high turnover in places because of the psychological strain and the long-term health issues that happen, um, and and because the work is really unsustainable. And yet there are people that are willing to go to the very ends because they believe in what they're doing. And unfortunately, that causes the burnout that happens. And I think another thing that's important is resistance to change. I know that in many cases, people say, well, this is always the way we've done it, and that's just the way we're going to do it. And that prevents modernization to happen. I know there are so many things that have changed since the internet has become a major part of our lives, and people are seeing things that are like, wow, that's such an easy solution. Why didn't somebody tell me before? So I think, a lot of people are great problem solvers, but in many cases they want to do things the old way when sometimes the new way is better. Or, you know just try it, see if it works. If it doesn't, maybe you have to go back. But I think those are some reasons.
Excellent. So your book talks about good intentions, and how your good intentions are not enough. And so taking that into the public safety realm, especially in leadership, but really across all organizations, what are some well-intended behaviors that leaders have that oftentimes quietly undermine long-term effectiveness?
I think that sometimes these leaders will want to over shield their teams from stress. I can think many times when my athletes were running, I knew the pain that they were going to go through in a workout. I just knew it because I'd been there before, and I was like, I hate for them to have to go through that pain. And if I could, I would rather take that pain for them. But then I realized that they won't get the results. So sometimes you have to let your team know the stresses that are there. I think that prevents growth sometimes when you don't give them that stress. I don't think that the those kids, if I took the pain, they wouldn't get the adaptation to become successful later on. I think sometimes micromanaging is a bad situation because if you micromanage, everybody expects you to do everything, and then no one knows how to do anything. So that is a problem. I think sometimes that there are conflicting views that are in the air and nobody does anything to address them. Sometimes you need to sit people down and say, these are some conflicting views. Let's get this straightened out. So let's make sure these views are there to help keep the peace. And often the leaders, they're not there as a person to treat other people as individuals. You need to learn your people. You need to talk to your people. You need to get to know your people, because if you don't know them, then they think you're just a number. And I've been talking to some people, even in the business level, that are saying, my boss doesn't even know I exist. My boss doesn't even say hi to me ever. And so, as a situation, how can trust be built? And so many things need to be developed on trust.
When a department or organization, I'll just say it this way, you always the horse that does the most work gets whipped the most. And I've heard that since I was a kid, and that means that you're always beating on the horse that or the person that will do the work. We see that in public safety, we see it in academia, we see it in manufacturing, all across career fields, that there's always one person that you rely on, maybe more than others, and you got that one go-to hero. What kind of situation, when you do have those go-to heroes, what risk does that create for sustainability, morale, and maybe even for us, safety?
I know what you're talking about. I always tried to make sure that we didn't rely on one individual, but that does happen a lot of times. And that causes a major risk, I think, for morale and safety. In that, what happens when this key individual leaves, when they go on vacation? If that individual is not there, then who's picking up their slack? Also, I know that there are some people and maybe some departments when they say, hey, this is a very specialized job, so we're only going to train one person on it. So now if that individual is specialized on that knowledge, well, what happens when he's not there and that needs to be done? Well, that creates a major bottleneck, and it very well hinders your organizational growth. And it could be a major problem if you have a situation that he's needed and he's not around, and you have to call in from somebody else. That could take a lot of major time. And so what we find is, I think if you have that person that is so important, and you might call him a hero, and you have this culture where, you have this hero, I think it becomes somewhat chaotic. And sometimes I know that the heroes, they do a great job, but in many cases they might do stuff maybe off the books, or not exactly the way it's supposed to be done. And they might get it done, but then what does that do to your standards in the long run? What does that do for the people? And they say, well, if he can get away with this, then maybe I can too. And in some cases, I know that there's situations you can't go by the book. You have to use your instincts. But there's other cases when, he's the hero, so he can do whatever he wants.
Awesome. Your book talks about how success hides weakness, but growth will actually expose your weaknesses. Many of our agencies, especially in policing, we measure success by calls handled, response times, clearance rates. All those metrics are definitely necessary, but how can certain metrics that measure performance, how can they hide the erosion of standards that you're trying to build?
Yeah. So the question is like, if you're just going by these measures, is it quantity versus quality? You can answer a lot of phone calls, or you can go to a lot of these places that need help, but did you just do that to check a box off, so to make sure that it's taken care of? And then maybe the guy might have to call back in another 10 minutes because the solution wasn't there. So then I guess you could check off another box. And then response time. Let's say that you want quick response times. They don't necessarily, qualify that it's going to be a great response, a high quality response, because it's so fast. And so I also think about like these statistics. So let's say that you're concerned about the number of calls that you've answered. So maybe you might only answer calls that are answerable. In some of the more difficult situations, you might put those on the back burner because you know that that's going to ding you from what you're trying to accomplish. I think statistics can mask a lot of things. So let's say that you have a community, and let's say you have a great police department. They're very proactive. They make sure things happen beforehand so that they don't have to be reactive. They don't have to check as many boxes as everybody else because they've been proactive. So if they're trying to meet some kind of quota, they might have a little bit more difficult than somebody else that's a reactive instead of a proactive. And I would say that what I tried to do was be more proactive. I always felt like that I probably wasn't the best at being able to hand out punishments. So I felt like if I could prevent that from happening, then I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to do those punishments. So I always tried to be more proactive. And I really felt like, and I did that maybe in a sense because I didn't want to have to do the punishment, but I did. I had to at times. But also, I think by being proactive, you kept kids from doing things that they should not have been doing in the first place, and kept them out of maybe some more serious trouble because you were more proactive. You knew that these guys were going to go to a get together in the weekend. So you talked to them about it beforehand. You knew that homecoming was coming up. So you talked to them about those types of things. And so it's the proactive instead of the reactive.
So you've coached literally thousands of athletes over the decades. In your experience, what are some of the most early warning signs that the standards are slipping, even during, the performance is still successful, it still looks good on paper, it's still checking boxes. What are some of those signs?
Oh, I think big signs are complacency. It's just like, okay, coach, we need to get through this so we can move on. A kid said that to me, that really would tick me off. And so that complacency, I always tried to tell them we did things for a reason, and so we're going to do them to the best of our ability. I think minor mistakes were problems that we could have taken care of, and maybe a lot of complaining. Sometimes with the kids started complaining a lot. I know in 2009, I had a group of boys that were complaining about one of the workouts, and I said, "Okay, we're not going to do this workout." And they're like, "Okay, why not?" So, well, this is what I think we need. We hadn't won a state title yet. I said, "This is what I think we need to be state champions. But if you guys don't want to do it, we won't do it." And then it completely changed their mind. They said, "No, coach, we were just joking." Well, they weren't, but they said that. And so that was an important part of that complaining. I think the big thing is undermining the unity of the team. I think that was a really big thing that I looked for. If I saw somebody that was trying to undermine the team, we had a group of boys one year, and it was a tough year, the year of COVID, and so they had to train during the summer, and I couldn't be with them. And there was about 5 or 6 guys. They all wanted to be the leader, and they were just kind of undermining. They were kind of back talking with each other, and I had to bring them together and say, "Hey, look, you guys haven't done anything yet. Yeah, we've won." At the time, it was 6 titles. Yeah, we won 6 titles, but only like 2 or 3 of you guys were involved in it. You haven't done anything yet. And what you're doing right now, you're going to tear this whole team apart. So you guys need to figure it out. You guys need to get together and you need to decide what the best thing is for the team. And they did. And they figured it out. 8 consecutive state titles was the record. And those boys, they were all younger boys, and so they really didn't know what was going on. So unfortunately, I could have probably stopped that if I would have been around, but I couldn't because of COVID. But I think that is a major problem when you have people that are undermining the team.
Very, very true. For coaches and supervisors, people in my world, how do we balance compassion for our burnt out team members with the responsibility of protecting those non-negotiable standards?
Well, I think it's important that you listen to those individuals that feel like they're burned out. You don't judge them. You may have been there yourself when you were their age. I think that sometimes with leaders, we forget the way we would have felt when we were in their situation and what would have been if someone would have said, "Hey, I'm going to listen to you. I'm not going to say that I agree with you, but I'm just going to listen to you." And sometimes what happens with people is when they start talking and they hear their problems, they start finding the solutions for themselves. Sometimes it's just the actual saying of the problem to get the answers to the solution. I think about that when I was teaching in science, kids would have problems and they would say, "Coach, I don't understand this." And I said, "Okay, let's walk through it." And they would start talking and they would be going through it and they say, "Oh, I figured it out. All I did was listen." They figured it out for themselves. Well, you got to be consistent with the communication. They got to realize that you have expectations for them. You're not going to enable them. You might be able to help them through the problems that they have compassion for their problems. And if you say, "Okay, I'm going to help you. I'm going to work these things through with you," that I think is a major important part. And some of these people, they may go on to be really good leaders, really good in their field. But if somebody doesn't get a hold of them early and try and help them out, they may go do something else. And in the end, we all suffer for that. I think that clear communications with them is very important. I think you need to be transparent with your goals. They need to be transparent with their goals. And I think by doing that, you're showing them a kindness. These are our goals. These are how we're going to meet them. These are the things you might have to do because maybe you're deficient in this. Maybe that's the reason you feel burned out. You need a little extra help. I can get that. I can have somebody help you. I would be leaving from a practice sometimes, and we would have kids sitting there, and I'm like, "Hey, you guys, practice is over. Go home." "Oh no, coach, we're gonna be here a while. I'm helping so and so with his math. He's having trouble." Oh, we were a good team. People were willing to do that for each other. I think if you can set up a situation where your people feel safe and psychologically, because like running, everybody says running's 90% mental. And people say, "Well, yeah, but look at these guys are out running 70 miles a week. They're doing all these workouts. How can it be 90% mental?" Well, it's 90% mental because, first of all, if you don't want to do the workouts, if you don't want to do the mileage, then it's not going to happen. So you have to get that fixed first. And I think probably with the first responders, everybody talks about the physical part, but they don't talk about the mental part enough, how important it is to be mentally stable in that job. And I know sometimes things happen and people just don't want to talk about it because it was so serious. But those are probably the times people need to talk about things and to get them figured out right away because tomorrow's another day and then something else bad might happen. And so then it starts compounding on each other. I think those are probably some of the important parts, but I think again, communication is very important. Letting them know that you're willing to help them, but you're not going to enable them. I know when kids would come and talk with me, I would hold them to a high standard and I would make sure that they realize that, hey, I'm not giving you a way out. This is going to be hard. But if you can take care of this, you are going to be a better person for it and then you're going to be ready to do something very special.
Excellent. So, as a longtime coach and a leader within your profession, people watched you. Your athletes watched you. Your peers watched you. Nobody gets watched closer than a coach of a public school team. People watched to see what you were doing, and they really watched to see how you reacted under pressure, especially your athletes. How does that leadership behavior, not policy, but leadership behavior, especially in times of stress, really shape the culture of a team?
Very big. I was very proud of our boys because, for one, so many other teams, so many other individual athletes would come up and talk with our boys, and they would even be rooting for us. And after you win for such a long time, people really generally they don't want you to win anymore. But we had a lot of people who still wanted us to win, and to me, that was a huge accomplishment that people would still want us to win because that's not natural. And so, what I tried to do is I tried to develop people that, hey, we're going to treat people right. Our seniors, you're going to be our example. You're going to be our leaders. You're actually going to do some things that people might not expect you to do, like maybe carry the tent to the bus. What you're going to do is you're going to set this situation up so it's the easiest possible situation for our freshmen and our sophomores to be successful. And you're going to do everything you can to make sure that they are successful because they look up to you and that's your job. And most of these guys, they didn't take it as a job. They took it as a coach. The boys before me, they helped me out as much as I can. Now it's my turn to help these guys out. So it was kind of like reaching a hand down and pulling people up. And so that was a big thing that we did. And I believe that that started with communication. There were so many freshmen that they would tell me when they were seniors, Coach, I was so shocked when the seniors would come up to me and say, hey, we're going to go over to somebody's house. Why don't you go with us? They didn't know me, Coach, and I was just a very awkward freshman, and they did that. I actually had one kid, he was a freshman, and a boy told him, he saw him somewhere, and he says, hey, I'm going to pick you up for summer running at 7 o'clock on Monday. Well, the young boy told me, he said, Coach, I hadn't even planned on going out for cross country, but because that guy told me he was coming to pick me up at 7 o'clock, I was ready to go. And so those types of things are very important, I think, to help those, behaviors to help those behind you. Now, I know that maybe first responders, there might have been something when you were young, a rookie or whatever you might call it, that you didn't like to do. Every once in a while, if a leader would go down there and say, hey, I remember doing this and maybe can I give you a hand today or something like that. I know leaders are busy, but hey, if you go down there and you say, hey, can I give you a hand? At that point, you can either extend a great amount of wisdom to that young person while you're helping them out, or they might have questions that they can ask you. And so again, you can extend a great amount of wisdom to them at those point in times. And just that small little interaction done very often, you never know what that action is going to do to draw them into you like glue. Because at that point, they realize that you have been there, you know what they're going through, and you care for them, not just your own job, but for them as individuals and that you care for the program that you set up so that it can be successful, so they can all be successful because one day they probably will aspire to move up.
So, your book talks about problem solving can't compensate for a weak foundation. And that really resonated with me. So much of my leadership career has been solving problems, simple or complex. But when you really look at those things, problem solving actually revealed deeper foundational problems.
Okay.
Leaders are excellent problem solvers by necessity. When does that constant fixing become a liability instead of a strength?
Well, I think it becomes a liability because when you basically stop becoming a leader and you start fixing everything, now you're creating a team that waits for you to fix everything rather than a team that wants to solve the problems on their own. So at first, it might seem like a strength because you can figure it out. You can take care of the crisis. You can intervene in these minor situations. But in the end, it really kind of hinders because now no one on your team knows how to do that. They just refer back to you. And what happens at that point is maybe you lose what I would call the next generation because they don't know how to do it because you did all those things. They were happy to allow you to do them because it might have made them look good, but you kind of lose that generation. And so when you start when then you might lose the depth. So now because you've done all the work for them, now you don't have any what they're really doing. And that becomes a major problem. So another thing is like if you're always like putting out these fires and you're always doing these things, then how can you be doing your own job? How can you be successful at your own job when you if you're reacting to so many problems instead in instead of trying to build a culture that prevents them, then no one wins in that situation. And I learned a while back that sometimes it's hard to watch people fail, but if you can find situations where their failure is not a major problem or doesn't cause destruction, and you can kind of build on those situations, like give them a first step. Okay, so now let's teach them something here. And then the next situation, maybe it's a little bit larger. So now they failed in that situation, but they learned something from that situation. And maybe the next situation, they do a better job. And so I tried to maintain that, but I always tried to have my athletes tried not to fix things for them. And in some situations, it was kind of tough to watch. And sometimes when I was just about ready to step in because it had just gone almost too far, someone corrected it. And I was like, wow, that's cool.
So problems. How do we tell the difference between something that's a real problem or something that may be a symptom of a much deeper seated, deeper rooted problem, something foundational?
Right. So, when I think about symptoms, I think about, okay, well, we lost. That's a symptom. What's the problem? Well, maybe we didn't practice hard enough. Maybe we didn't, maybe I because in many cases, I always looked at myself first. Maybe I didn't do something that I needed to do to make sure these boys were ready. And then if I'm like, well, I did what I thought I was supposed to, what needed to be done, then I went back to the drawing board. I said, okay, maybe we got a real problem here. Our intensity wasn't hard enough. But I also, on many occasions, not many occasions, but a few, if I felt that I was at fault, I admitted it. I admitted it. I had so one of our main goals, one of our standards was let's give 100% every single day. Now, 100% on an easy day is not the same, but if you're doing your reps, you're doing them the best you can. You're working. You're trying to help your teammates become better. And I told them I had to tell my boys one day, hey, I'm sorry about yesterday because I didn't. I'm the coach. If I'm asking you to give 100%, then I have to give 100%. But yesterday I was distracted by whatever I was distracted by, and I only gave about 80% yesterday. And I'm sorry, and I'm going to do better. And I think that's important that that people realize that whoa, if he's acting like that, well then maybe we better get our act together. And I think if you sometimes the lack of discipline, but you always got to go back and you always got to look and you always got to say to yourself, okay, what is this a symptom? Like us losing, or is it something more important that we have to go back and we have to readjust the way our culture is? I think sometimes you look at small things, they will reveal big issues. Small habits can cause problems And that's something that you need to take care of. If if your team starts to fail, you could blame the runners, or you could blame yourself, or you can blame your system. And again, I think another thing that I tried to do is I tried to say, okay, boys, what happened? What happened? And then that way we can say, the coach, they might give me some things that happen. But I was really proud of my boys. They really didn't hardly ever give me an excuse because they knew I wasn't accepted. But there's things that happen that are not excuses. If a guy breaks his leg and he can't win a race, that's not an excuse. You know what I'm saying? So we would sit down and we would say, okay, what do we need to do? So then I could get input from those guys. And then I could determine, was it them? Was it me? Was it our standards are falling? Our culture's not where we need to be? Or hey, maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe we just move on from it. It just we didn't get the results. Maybe, just maybe, there was a team that was better than us that day, and we moved on. We lost the race in Forest Park one year, and the boys came up to me after the race. They knew, hey, coach, we lost. They didn't give me any excuses. They said, hey, coach, we lost, but we know how we're going to beat this team the next time we race them. I said, oh, great. Tell me. And they told me, sure enough, we beat them. And they were one of the top teams in the state. So that was exciting.
Coach, if you could encourage a leader to have one mindset shift that comes from the book Built Right, what would it be?
Whew, that's a good question. I think that the big thing is build leaders. Build leaders. Don't just simply manage tasks. Try to build leaders. Invest in your people. Everybody's not. You might look at somebody and say, "Well, not everybody's going to be a leader in the force you're in, whether it's the fire, the police department." But they still need to at some point be a leader. So invest in them. Focus from just having them getting the task done to develop them. No, I know this is kind of a probably a controversial thing, but character is an important thing that I think that we as leaders can help regardless. A lot of the guys that you'll have in coming starting new are young men and young women. And these young men and these young women, they need direction. They need to know good character, and trying to help build that in people is important. I know that that was one of my goals when I was coaching these young men is I wanted to develop great leaders and I wanted to develop people that have good character. And, some people define character in different ways and good character in different ways. But I think most people truly know what good character is. And if they don't, well, then they need to do some studying on it. And so I think that that's helped develop. We've had over the last probably 15 years, we're going to have at least 15 or 20 guys that have gone on to be engineers. We've had two guys go to the Naval Academy, and one of the guys flying helicopters now, and the other guy's flying cargo planes. And we got guys going into ROTC. And so we've had a lot of guys that have become leaders. And I think if you try and develop people as leaders, you're going to develop better people. And when you develop better people, then that's going to help your team more than anything, I think, because once you develop people, you have that mentorship with them and you develop them, then they're going to want to do the best they can, not just for themselves, not just for you, but for the community, which basically is what their job's all about. And when those hard times come, when you invest that time, they're going to be happy to do their job. And of course, they're not going to be happy when the hard times come, but they're going to be able to get through them a little bit better. I think one other great thing, I know you might only said one, but
Go ahead.
the other great thing is I think high standards is a great thing to do. Develop high standards. I know that for many people that go into your line of work, they feel like they need to be at more of a high standard. And I think when you develop these high standards, that gives people purpose and it also gives them greater accountability. And I don't know about you, but for me, having a higher accountability is important because sometimes you don't always do what's right. But if you hold yourself at the higher accountability, maybe what you do won't be as bad as if you didn't.
Very true. Coach, you're traveling, you're speaking, you've got your book Built Right. Thanks to Mason Dukacek for co-authoring this with you. Where can our viewers get this book at?
You can go on Amazon and get that book. You just plug in the title, Built Right, and it should pop up. And Mason and I felt like we had some information that we wanted to get out. We felt like, and Mason was a high influence on this. He felt like, hey, you did something that was pretty amazing, and you need to let other people know about it. And I'm not really a good self promoter, so he's helped me out on that. But we really feel like if people would follow the steps that we've gone through, it's a short read, but if you're really going to get something out of it and you're really going to help people, I think it's something that you have to go back and study. And we really feel like we've been blessed with a good type of information to help leaders become better.
It's fantastic. Coach, thanks for joining us, for sharing your lessons on leadership and culture and building something that lasts. It's really difficult in today's society to build something that lasts, but I think your book, Built Right, is certainly a blueprint for doing that. So as we close today's conversation, here's the takeaway. Pressure didn't create your problems. Pressure revealed what was already there. What Coach Bryant Wright showed us through the decades of leadership in a small town in Missouri, the cross country program, is that durability isn't built in moments of crisis. It's built long before that test ever shows up. In the standards that you protect, in the behavior that you tolerate, and in the systems that you build when things are calm. And whether you're leading a fire company, a police shift, an EMS crew, or a hospital unit, the environment may be different, but the truth is the same. Heroics don't sustain organizations. Intentional leadership does. If you're wearing responsibility for others, if people rely on you to make decisions under pressure, this episode isn't about running faster or doing more. It's about building something that holds together when the pressure comes, because it always does. Ask yourself this: if the test showed up tomorrow, would it reveal something or expose cracks you've been ignoring? That question lives at the center of Built Right, and it lives at the center of leadership and public safety. Thanks for listening to the Iron Intention podcast. If this conversation challenged the way you think about leadership, share it with someone who carries the load. Until next time, build it right, protect the standard, and lead with intention.